my partners and I are very focused on regenerative growth around the environment. So it's the notion that maintaining status quo is no longer okay, that we're in a situation with so many externalities around climate issues, around economic hardships, that we really need to be focused on how do we build a new economy, how do we regenerate income and revenue for our citizens.
Hi, I'm Jason Makstein with Moderately Mic'd. Today I'm joined by Steve Shapiro, founder and principal of Praxis Energy, to discuss the growing debate over data centers in Montgomery County, the proposed moratorium, and whether communities, developers, and the government can find a better way to negotiate major infrastructure projects. Steve, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Jason. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so before we get into the data center debate, can you just explain yourself, introduce yourself and explain in plain language what Praxis Energy does?
Sure. Again, my name is Steve Shapiro. I'm a mediator with a large background in the energy sector, and have been mediating, facilitating, and now organizing groups of neutrals and technical experts to work with community to better understand each other and get to agreements in the face of massive conflict facing society. And Praxis is an organization, and maybe starting with the definition of praxis, which is Greek, stems from practice, right? That we, so if anybody becomes great at a sport, anybody becomes great at a musical instrument, they're practicing. Praxis is the vision and the living the realized hope and dream of what we all want to happen, right? So what we're holding, what Praxis is holding, is a possibility and a field that all sides can really get what they want out of data center development right now. Praxis is also on the West Coast, focusing on home hardening in the face of fires, wildfires. Mm-hmm. So the notion being to create a whole workforce, new workforce, and trained in how do you deploy to harden homes to prevent wildfires from burning down neighborhoods.
Uh-huh.
So we're working both the data center front and the West Coast front.
Uh-huh. And what first drew you towards mediation and helping people resolve difficult disputes rather than taking one side and fighting for it?
Well, I had a personal court experience in litigation with an employer at an early age who terminated me. It was my first firing and only firing of a job. And I realized how litigation sucks, really, from that, being personally involved. And I wound up, after that, working in the federal sector at FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And it was a time when Congress passed, it was a different time in our world, but Congress passed legislation requiring all federal agencies to use alternative dispute resolution. And mediation, arbitration, facilitation was all part of the law, requiring agencies to build that into their contracting, procurement procedures, into their EEO, employment disputes, into their personal injury type negotiations, and then also how they establish rulemakings to be more collaborative. And so I was on the ground floor when that legislation passed, and my agency lent me to a group called the Administrative Conference of the U.S., who was implementing the law across the federal sector, and I became one of the leaders in training, educating, and really lifting up the federal workforce and the contractor workforce. And what I liked about mediation was the notion that you could build outcomes and you could build solutions that were almost bigger than the problem itself. So it's one thing for a court and in litigation to give a yes or no decision, who's right, who's wrong. But in mediation, and this should be a thread throughout our discussion, really focusing on the interests and the needs of all the parties. And how do you lift that up? How do you listen to each of them, understand them? You know, it's sort of the Japanese notion of the bow. When someone's speaking, the bow is not that I agree or disagree, but it's that I understand with deep respect.
That's really cool. I like that analogy there. And you spent 18 years at the Federal Energy Regulation Commission and founded its dispute resolution service. Was there a particular case or exchange that changed the way you think about major infrastructure conflicts?
Well, what comes to mind is a number of different cases. One that was, it was a hydro project in East Texas, and this is near the Louisiana-Texas border. It was a board of directors running the hydro project that was half from Louisiana, half from Texas. The power was being distributed in both states. And there was a flooding event, and 2 people died on the river near the dam. And we had sent in a number of the commission had sent in a number of technical people to try to resolve things, and then they turned to the dispute resolution service to go. And I found myself in a situation where I was right on the heels. It was really difficult, where a young black man was dragged on the back of a pickup truck and died. And then shortly after, this death occurred on the river, the grandfather and his grandson. And we gathered in the community center near the dam, and the community had built this cross out of beautiful gemstones. And I gathered the community around this cross to really pray of sorts for each other and for some solutions. And it was an opportunity for people to share, it was an opportunity for people to listen, and it was an opportunity to get real about what are the federal, the state, and the local governments doing with the hydro project operators to fix the problem. And so it was a communications problem, it was an operations problem. So that initial meeting and getting the community involved was a way to open up the convening and the collaboration amongst entities that don't normally talk to each other. And you'll see there's a commonality in what we're facing in data center development across the U.S. today, because it's multiple jurisdictions who are involved. It's not just the local county who's involved.
Right, because even if it's in one location, it's going to affect multiple areas as well.
That and the state's going to have authority over the energy siting. The feds are going to have, or through PJM in our area, they'll have jurisdiction over the interconnection to the grid. And then the state's going to have jurisdiction back over any environmental easements that was in their bailiwick. So it's not, when we talk about the data center piece, I'm about to move into it, it's such a complex area because of these multiple authorities who are involved. And I think that's what's putting this, why basically jurisdictions are issuing the moratoriums and things are coming to a halt, because a lot of councils haven't been really trained to deal in this multiple permitting jurisdictional complexity, if you will. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And after working on some of the country's largest energy disputes, what made you want to bring that experience into communities and projects in Maryland?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And look, I've grown up here of sorts. You know, I've raised my family here. Uh, my religious synagogue is here. My synagogue is here. My kids grew up here. I served as the president of the Conflict Resolution Center for Montgomery County and served on the board for years. So I have the local attachment, and I have a legal practice that's also local here, you know, where I do collaborative law work. I think that Montgomery County, and I have the greatest honor and respect for the people who lead the county today and who's going to be coming in November. I think we are incredibly fortunate to be living where we're living today. And we are facing and suffering the aftermath of the Doge events last January and February and March in DC. And we know that Maryland and Montgomery County has taken a big hit in terms of tax revenue, payroll tax, and so forth, because of the mass firings at the federal sector level. And I see that there's a real opportunity for the county to become a model for the rest of the nation in how to do this right. Mm-hmm. And in particular, I was attending Thursday a technical conference at my old agency at FERC on the restructuring of PJM. And PJM, for folks who may not know, they coordinate and manage the electric grid, all the transmission and distribution, all the transmission and generation for 14 states in the Mid-Atlantic and the District of Columbia. And so they're looking at a massive restructuring of that whole process. And again, I think Montgomery County right now is positioned, with, whether it's with Dickerson or some other project, Dickerson's the one that's most live, to use it as a way to do it right, as a way to get it right. And we'll talk more how that could come about.
Okay, look forward to that. Yeah. So before discussing whether Montgomery County should permit data centers, what exactly is a modern data center, and why does it require so much electricity and supporting infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, look, do you use AI?
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
you're probably watching this on a platform that does as well.
Right. So we're all dipping our feet into that technology. How many streaming services do you have on your TVs at home? Mm-hmm. You know, that's creating a whole other demand for data. So as we advance societally in this technological world, you know, part of it is consumer driven, and I think there's a lot of concern from the socially minded, environmentally minded folks who are part of this conversation, that it's being levied on us, that, you know, why do we need such a big data center? So a data center is a large, you know, anybody who's driven through Loudoun County and have seen these warehouses, huge warehouses, back to back to back, it's a group of servers. A server is essentially a computer with microchips, and the larger the data center, the more servers are in there, and so they're generating power greater than we've ever seen before. In some cases could power a small city, and they're using water at the rate of a small city. So nobody really foresaw that when it was happening, and it's causing a massive shortage of energy. So Northern Virginia is curtailing power to the data centers, and they're also, I think, not fully aware of what all the impacts are to the water. I mean, we're hearing stories around the country, literally nightmare stories of how water could be contaminated and some of the other environmental harms. So, but at the same time, we're seeing our economy built around it, right? So anybody's 401k and pension plans and so forth, all the AI stocks are doing pretty well, and they're forming a massive part of the equity that we're seeing in our investments. And so, and all of that is shaping, along with our concern about China and a war with China, and we have to get ahead of the AI curve if we're going to be successful as a nation. And so you could feel and see the complexities here. You know, you've got multiple jurisdictions, and you got these complex sets of technologies all operating and impacting the environment. And how does a community hold that level of complexity? So it's kind of natural that it's almost traumatic, if you will, that level of impact is coming into your community. And so it makes sense in my mind that people would just say no. You know, I don't want that to happen here. And yet we start out and we realize we're using AI.
Yep.
We're streaming more. The demand is there, the need is there, and yet we have this misunderstanding or fear of what it really is, and how can we harness it to make it work.
Yeah, you know, certainly I use AI a lot, and again, all the platforms that I'm on, each one of them, I think that's one thing that people don't really realize. They're like, oh, you know, I don't even use AI. Well, you just posted that on a platform that is using AI, not only in the, you know, if you use it, but it's using it to store, you know, to sort stuff, and scanning every piece of content you put on there is checked for copyright. It's checked for, you know, guidelines and everything. So it's intertwined in everything at this point. And so, you know, that gets us to what's happening in Montgomery County. So for someone who has not been following closely, what is being proposed in Dickerson?
Well, Dickerson, for folks who are not aware, it's a dual industrial site, brownfield, somewhere in the area of 550 acres. It was previously a operating coal generating facility that Pepco shuttered in 2020. It sits next door to the Montgomery County Recycle Center that their lease comes due in 2027 sometime. And it turns out that the question about what to do with the recycling center, from what I understand, is almost, if not more controversial than what are we going to do with the data centers. So there's a company called Terra Energy who purchased the land, and they hired a company called Atmosphere Energy to do the site prep for the facility. What was in their original marketing and promotional materials was that they would interconnect to the grid at the interconnection point where the coal facility was. So that made it a very attractive property to any developer, that they could just, not every site has that. And that they would have backup battery storage, which would be diesel driven, which would be emitting carbon into the atmosphere, but that during a reliability test, when you know, there's a power outage or shortage, then the backup batteries can become operational and it could keep running. So that's what they've proposed, and it's not clear how all that is going to unfold as the county proceeds here.
And so why are data center developers looking at Montgomery County and Maryland now?
Yeah, I mean, it is the regional, so when you look at what's occurred in Manassas, Loudoun County, and covering, you know, crossing over into Frederick, which is building a big data center structure there, number of data centers, and then dropping down into Dickerson, you have a sort of an interconnection of the grid and of the centers operating, all tied to proximity to DC, to Department of Defense, to other CIA, State Department, all who are massively using data today. So Montgomery County is again, and PG County is also, and Maryland is poised to become a leader in data center development. And I think there's been a healthy tension, if you will, between the governor and the legislature. You know, the interesting kind of back and forth was that the governor was, supporting development cautiously, that we don't do anything to harm the environment and impact local communities, but didn't want to have local communities have the veto authority over whether a data center gets built. And so the legislature wanted the local communities to have that authority. The governor vetoed that, and this is all at the end of 2025, so not that far ago. And then the legislature came back and said, look, let's do a thoughtful, meaningful study of the environmental issues, of the energy issues, and of the economic workforce opportunity. So the Maryland Department of the Environment, Maryland Energy Administration, and the Charles Smith Maryland School of Business, University of Maryland School of Business, are all involved, and that is coming due reports are coming due in September, and my hat's off to Nature Forward, who is a coalition of 70 environmental NGOs who are really tracking this very thoughtfully and meaningfully, and they just posed open questions to those three state agencies to say, well, what are you doing about all the concerns that we have?
Okay, and we'll get to those concerns in a second.
Yeah.
Of which there are a lot, but first, what are the strongest potential economic and public benefits that a data center could realistically bring to Montgomery County?
Yeah, I mean, this is my favorite part, because this is the upside, if you will, that we could be thinking about. So why Northern Virginia built as fast as they did, and why there's supposedly $1 billion in tax revenues coming from data centers in Virginia, is just that. You have the property tax, you have the payroll tax on the workers who are being employed, and an ongoing stream of tax revenue flowing into the county and the state following construction. So that's sort of like a baseline if you don't do anything, and you're just, but if you're active, as Praxis sees Montgomery County being and setting the example, then we begin to look at, let's say, property protection. So if you're in proximity to the data center in Dickerson, and you have a concern that your property value is going to lose value, then what we say is let's come up with a mechanism that we can get your home value today, so that if you come back in 5 years and your home value decreases, then you'll be assured, as part of the agreement being worked out with the developer, that decrement of loss will you'd get compensated for it. So that's one area. When we started Praxis, emergency preparedness was really at the top of the list. And I don't think we talk about this enough as a potential benefit. And what that means is, there's a microgrid in Olney that supports the police station, the hospital, and the firehouse and the emergency dispatch units. And a microgrid is a power source that comes on, like you have a backup battery on your computer or a backup battery in your house if you have solar coming in. And so too, I don't believe that the county government has a microgrid around it. I think that there are opportunities to use the tax revenues and other benefits that could flow out of the negotiations to support the community infrastructure, particularly, as we're facing more climate emergencies. And I think when we looked at what happened in Asheville and a flood event that occurred in the western Appalachia, not on the shore, that anything could happen anywhere at any time. And, we're very fortunate. We have Maryland Department of Homeland Security in our backyard at the old National Geographic facility. And there's still more that we could be doing, because I don't think any of us really understand how devastating climate could be and probably may be as we move forward. So that's one area. There's a whole other, Jason, you have young children, right?
Yep.
So what's happening in schools? Is AI being taught in schools? Is it being pushed away because we're afraid of it and we don't want students to not be able to do the work themselves?
It's kind of, there's actually, that debate is probably one of the biggest debates going on in education right now, other than just purely funding, where there are people, there's some people worried about the privacy concerns, about what data people should be rightfully afraid of. There's issues of having too much screen time in general in schools. And then there's the other hand of how are we preparing students for the future? Yeah. Because, so I have 13 interns this summer, and before I got them, I gave them a survey. All 13 of them have used ChatGPT. 9 of 13 had also used Gemini. Another 9 of 13, maybe not overlapping, had used Claude. So we're talking about essentially 100%, if you combine it, of students have used at least 2 different major AI, LLMs. And so, how are we just saying, go use it, or are we participating in that education and saying, here's how you use it properly, here's what you don't use it on? I actually was I did a presentation last week in a college course on political research using AI, and we went over, here's a good application of AI, here's a bad application, and why. So those are the sort of things that I think the conversations we should be having with the students to prepare them for the future, instead of just being like, well, if you get caught, you're in trouble, right? Because that's essentially what it is right now. Right. And they're not saying, okay, I want you to go use AI, but here's how to use it properly. Here's how to cite stuff. Here's how to make sure you're actually using real information. So,
yeah, and I think one of the challenges that we have with the data center complexity, if you will, is that it's an outside entity, one of the big tech companies in most cases, who are coming in and they're using the data for something outside of Montgomery County.
Right.
Montgomery County doesn't find itself as the direct beneficiary of the data that's getting generated. So why not, and this is a question that Praxis asks the stakeholders and the collaborative, so how important is it to get this right, and would funding help, would having consultants help? Is that something that a community benefit fund could be allocated towards, so that you're making a little more of a direct connection between what the data center conceptually is supposed to be doing in advancing AI, but let's really see how we could do it constructively in schools as another potential benefit that could flow. And again, maybe one of the most important is the workforce development, and the concern that the contractor's term is tied to the construction timeline of the facility. Right. So we're told that it's 1.5 years, 2 years, and okay, so you get a job for 1.5 years, 2 years, but then what do you do? So I think we really need to be thinking strategically, and this is where doing it on a statewide and on a regional basis, and we've talked, we're talking to regularly the IBEW folks from Northern Virginia and from Maryland, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, trying to see, can you pattern and sequentially schedule data centers so that your workforce is gainfully employed throughout, because they're union members. Because nobody likes to see, from their standpoint, I mean, they're against the moratoriums because they want work.
Yeah.
And if the community knew that we could also be establishing, so, that's what we're going to see come from the University of Maryland, Charles E. Smith Business School, as well as I think Montgomery County, the community college can also be providing some certification. And if we're building out, so the grid benefits, which is another huge aspect if we do this right. Rates are going up, electric rates are going up, people are concerned and worrying about that, and people are trying to, unfortunately, a lot of people are making trade-offs. Do I buy my prescriptions? Do I have the air conditioning on when it's 100 degrees? And those are unacceptable trade-offs for our community. We're one of the wealthiest communities in the country, and we're still making those trade-offs. And we have, I watched your interview with the CEO of MANA, and just knowing that how wider spread poverty is existing in our county. So what can we do to lift up the workforce? What can we do to sustain the workforce? And like the work we were doing at the Conflict Resolution Center, can there be a way to take folks leaving prison or train them in prison on aspects of some of the work that's needed so that they have a place to enter into society and be really productive, contributing members?
All right. Yeah, there's a lot of potential.
There is.
And I guess you're thinking maybe people will have to decide, right? Like you can't have everything you want, right? So you put it all on the plate and then you see what you can get.
Well, we're trying to, my partners and I are very focused on regenerative growth around the environment. So it's the notion that maintaining status quo is no longer okay, that we're in a situation with so many externalities around climate issues, around economic hardships, that we really need to be focused on how do we build a new economy, how do we regenerate income and revenue for our citizens. And the data center is an opening conversation for that to happen. And it's also an opening conversation for community to happen. You're doing this incredible work here, Jace, bringing leaders in the community together, highlighting them, and sharing their success stories. We need community to be more in connection with one another. I think that's when you look at the psychological studies at post-COVID, post-authoritarianism, facing the climate issues that we're facing. We need to be more in relationship and connection, and it is one of the real benefits of having our kids put away their phones, particularly in school, so that they can really learn to be with one another and talk to one another and not be texting all the time.
Yeah, so now that we've gone through the potential benefits, let's get to what are the most legitimate concerns involving electric rates, water, noise, environmental effects. You already kind of got into property values and the surrounding community.
Well, the electric piece is being partially directed by the Maryland Utility Relief Act that passed, the governor signed into law in May, and that's requiring, well, it's posing an incentive for the data center developers to use 90% renewable energy to for the how much energy they're going to be using on the grid. And if they do that, then what the legislature is saying, then we're going to give you green lights on the siting and permitting for that work. So you're not going to be delayed. We're going to try to expedite you through. So that's number one goal. So we'll get to the enforcement piece, but we want the cost of the power is a big piece, and protecting the community and the ratepayers from paying for the data centers usage. That's completely crazy if you and I are paying for their usage, and transmission upgrades that need to get built because they're using so much power. You and I should not be paying for that. And in the beneficiary, when you look at the asset liability spreadsheet, the asset is that they should actually be paying for the upgrades that are going to benefit the rest. It's going to benefit them, but it could also benefit the rest of the region and the area that's there. The water, I think, is a definite showstopper, if you will, as I think the energy is too, that we need to discover what are the best methodologies for recycling, evaporating the water. I'm not an water expert by any means, but I know that given the issues, there more and more expertise is developing. So yeah, if the Potomac is going to be impacted at all negatively, the answer should be no, and we should just close our tent right away. But if there are technologies that need to get explored, and if there are ways to mitigate that and get the other benefits that we're talking about, then it's worth that trade-off in the negotiation. Noise, I look at a site in Norway that they built underground, and they're using geothermal to power the facility, and there was extra electricity to power the local community. What a great deal, right?
Yeah.
You don't see it. And then in January, I was at one of the first hydro projects in Snoqualmie, Washington, outside Seattle. And the hydro project was buried. So it's making me think, why, you look at the resources that these tech giants have. Why can't we bury, or at least put it partially underground and be berming, because and again, there are things you could do for noise. They're going to spend money to prevent the noise. The noise is real. I was told that it's like looking at the Erin Brockovich website. Erin Brockovich is one of the leading outspoken people against data center development.
The real one?
The real Erin Brockovich.
I've seen the movies.
and she says like a toothbrush, electric toothbrush, like that's always going in your ear. I don't know if that's true, but if that is the case, that's pretty obnoxious and pretty annoying.
Yeah.
And that can't stand. So again, any of these in any combination lead to a no, but it's also the opening conversation for what can we do to get it right. And so Praxis we're becoming a bit of a clearinghouse for new technology, so that we could recommend different uses, and so if we have I was meeting with our partners at MIT who are helping us lead a symposium for the area, and I was delayed. I'm sitting at the bar, and there's a guy who's at a conference, and we strike up a conversation, and he tells me he's developing a protective shield for the chips so that it's cooling the chips. So they're working in coordination with the chip manufacturers, and this coolant strip goes over the chips and is reducing the power usage and the heat that's being generated. So it's less water cooling and less power.
Oh, wow.
So that type of technology is coming on the scene, as well as we have one of my partners are affiliated with a technology. It's more of a computing service that's also using like a ninth of the power that a regular data center is doing. So, and you may have heard, I mean, it raises the question of like, well, why do we need two football fields or three football fields? What if we put it into, the 15-yard line to the goal line and can compute the same level of load that's needed from that data center, same level. And I think that's where we're heading technologically. And nationwide, we're at risk of overbuilding all these facilities. So that's another type of conversation that we could be having.
Yeah, I've seen some ideas of putting them on individual houses, and you put solar panels on the house. They pay for it, right? And then you have like a little mini shed that serves a data center.
So let's go there.
Potential idea? Yeah.
It's more than a potential idea. It's being done. Google has 100 megawatt, which is a big lot of generation, as part of this virtual power plant operation in, I think, New Jersey. So the idea being is that you have the data center coming in, and the developer, Google in this case, is investing in, I forget how many properties, but let's say you and I are in that community. Google will sign a contract with Google. Google will put on the solar panels. They'll put in the batteries, and we'll each sign a lease, so that when we're generating more than that's needed, a percentage of that energy we're going to make money off of, and we're going to own the asset. Google doesn't own the asset, and then when they need the energy, they're calling it, and we're agreeing that we're going to assign that essentially to them as part of the distribution system, and it's a real win-win. And I personally think that's, for Montgomery County, I would love for us to be exploring that more, because that's jobs, that's infrastructure, that's clean energy, and it's really leveraging the development as much as we can. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I found that one interesting. I guess the two things people have mentioned is the downsides to that are potential noise, right? Or
noise from what?
Like noise from that little mini data center thing on your house, and then also like you got this valuable.
There's no data center. It's just the panels and the batteries.
Oh, okay. So what I was hearing about was one where you have like, maybe a set amount of servers
that could be
on there.
Yeah.
Where you have the batteries, you have the panels, and then like a shed that has a mini tiny data center. And then again, the people said, or I was reading online about it. So the people being random online people, saying that the issues would be like noise and heating and cooling, but then also if you have that valuable resource on the side of your house, is somebody gonna is that gonna be the new catalytic converters where people come in and steal these valuable chips and stuff like that? So.
Well, I think we are, and with the new incoming leadership coming into the county, and low-income housing being a big concern for County Executive-elect Jawando, I think that there's an opportunity here as well to get a community benefit fund, or to actually build, as you're describing more, into like a low-income housing units, the data center or the solar or a computing op center, something, what I was describing earlier, one of our affiliates who we're talking to be able to compute with 1/10 the energy of a traditional facility. And because it's a much smaller footprint, then it can go into a smaller building. And then the income generating from that could help to subsidize a lower income property, low income housing.
Gotcha. Yeah, there's a lot of different options and potential. I know they did a solar project like that as well. They've done a couple to help, with energy issues. So you've lived in Montgomery County for 30 years? Is that?
Plus.
Does looking at this debate as a longtime resident change the way you approach it professionally?
I think it's a good question. I think it motivates me more. I think of in 2016, I was mediating a case involving the state of California and Shell Oil when the 45th president of the United States got elected. And for whatever reason, at that point in time, I took a bit of a turn in my practice, and I started studying about trauma and conflict. And I was learning that, and I think it may have been new to me. I think a lot of people do understand it, that when you trace the origins of a conflict, it also often originates somewhere in childhood, somewhere in an earlier trauma in our life, and that what's happening when we're in the conflict situation now, that earlier stored trauma is getting expressed today. And so I did more internal work, if you will. I've been a lifelong meditator almost, and so it was very much consistent with that practice. And so when I look at my relationship to where I live and my neighborhood, we live in Kentlands, which was designed through charrettes, through working together with the community to envision what Kentlands could look like. And we were there 2 years after the beginning. Been there since 1990. 96, I'm sorry. A little more than 2 years. I think there's just a real caring and concern for what's going to happen here. Again, I think this is when I look at what's happening around the country and what's going on, I think we are very fortunate to be living where we're living.
Yeah, and so, coming back to the question of what the county should do, what the council should do. So you said that the central question is larger than whether the county should approve or reject a specific project. What specific, and I don't want to get into too much detail about the moratorium and the current legislative stuff because, it's kind of moving quickly, and by the time this airs, who knows where that will be. But what specific work do you think that the county should be doing during a potential moratorium that seems likely to happen so that it doesn't simply reach the end of the pause with the same unresolved questions?
Yeah, I think this is true for all the states and local governments who are putting in moratoriums, that there is an opportunity to continue work. Don't stop work. We have proposed draft legislation to a few of the county council members. This came out of a study with our partners at MIT, also our partners at the World Resource Institute, who are studying other legislation that's being implemented across the country around data center development. So we think one of the first things that the council should do is establish the ground rules through legislation and a regulatory scheme of how we're going to manage the process. And that goes back to what we were talking earlier, that we're dealing with multiple jurisdictions. That's not only within that the council doesn't have authority over, but the council, because it is the local permitting authority for the land and the siting, I think has the impetus and the energy to convene all these multiple parties together. And so that's what our draft legislation is focused on. We also studied the biggest concern of what do you do after you have an agreement in place? How do you enforce it? Mm-hmm. And so there's steps put into the draft legislation, and what we're learning is what we ought to be thinking about is third-party quality control who will come in. So if the developer says we're going to put 90% solar in through a virtual power plant, how do we know that? Mm-hmm. And so who's going to come in and enforce that, or study it, monitor it, and report to the steering committee who's has the authority to follow up if something's not happening. And that's one aspect. Okay. Is the legislation. Then the second aspect is to pick a pilot and start the convening. Bring in a neutral entity who could help convene all the parties, the state government, the feds, and the local, set up the community advisory boards and the steering committee, and along with setting up the digital dashboard so that there's a 24/7 AI interactive queuing with the local community, so that if you're up at 3 a.m. and you want to share something, that you can go on, share your thought. We're going to integrate it into the issues, concerns that are getting shared with the steering committee.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. One of the biggest complaints I've seen online is promises given by the data centers and then breaking them.
Yeah.
So making sure that there is a third party to monitor it and then an enforcement mechanism possible definitely should be somewhere part of that.
Right.
So we're running a little out of time here, but so skipping a few questions. But what happens next in the county process? How can residents participate constructively, and where can people learn more about Praxis Energy and your work?
Well, as we're piloting the project, the Dickerson project, let's say, and this digital dashboard is launched, that will be one way. I mean, obviously, supporting the county council, supporting open meetings, testifying, paying attention, listening in. I left a one-pager for you to maybe post with the show notes for today.
Sure.
And our website URL could be up there. People could feel free to reach out to me and my team, and we're happy to talk to anybody with questions.
Okay, great. Well, Steve, thanks so much for joining me and helping both explain the data center debate and the possibility of handling major infrastructure projects differently. And thank you to everyone who watched and submitted questions. Be sure to follow Moderately Moco and Moderately Mike's for more local conversations and updates.